There is a warship sitting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor right now. Not deep, barely 12 meters down, close enough that part of its hull still breaks the surface at low tide. You can see it from the shore of Ford Island if you know where to look. Most people do not look. Most people are less than a kilometer away at the USS Arizona Memorial, which draws well over 1 million visitors every year. The Arizona has a gleaming white structure built directly above it. Utah has a small plaque on a restricted military pier that the general public cannot reach. Both ships were sunk on the same morning. Both ships still hold the men who went down with them. Arizona became a national symbol. Utah became something quieter than that. Not forgotten exactly, but left. And every year that passes, the hull deteriorates a little further. The steel thins a little more, and the question of what happens next becomes harder to answer cleanly. The USS Utah rests capsized on the northwest side of Ford Island, which sits in the middle of Pearl Harbor, which sits inside an active United States Navy installation. That combination matters. The wreck is not remote. It is not in deep ocean darkness. It is not technically inaccessible in the way that some famous wrecks are inaccessible. The water is shallow, the location is known, the hull is partially visible, and yet it has not been touched in any substantial way since 1942. 58 men are still inside it. They were never recovered, and no formal plan currently exists to recover them. The National Park Service administers the Arizona Memorial nearby, but Utah falls under Navy jurisdiction, on land and water that civilian visitors cannot freely enter. That distinction, one ship memorialized and publicly mourned, the other guarded and mostly unseen, is not accidental. It begins with what the Utah actually was by the time it was attacked. The Utah was commissioned in 1909 as a frontline battleship, one of the most powerful warships the United States Navy operated at the time. But naval technology moved fast. By the early 1930s, it had been reclassified and converted, stripped of much of its armament, its decks fitted with timber planking so that it could serve as a target ship for aerial bombing practice. By December 1941, the Utah was not a combat vessel. It was a training platform, in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Japanese pilots attacking Pearl Harbor that morning saw a large warship silhouette and targeted it anyway. 2 aerial torpedoes struck Utah in the first wave of the attack. The ship capsized in as little as 8 to 12 minutes. That speed, fully inverted before most of the crew could reach the exits, is what trapped the men inside. Some were cut free by sailors who worked through the overturned hull with acetylene torches, burning through steel from the outside while men knocked on the hull from within. 58 could not be reached in time. Utah was already demoted by history before it was destroyed by war. It died anyway. After December 7th, the Navy had to make decisions quickly and under enormous pressure. Pearl Harbor was a disaster scene with dozens of damaged or destroyed vessels and a war that had just begun. Salvage teams worked through 1942 prioritizing ships that could be repaired and returned to active service. The battleship Nevada was refloated. The California and West Virginia were eventually raised and repaired, both returning to fight later in the war. The Oklahoma was righted after a massive, months-long effort using a system of winches and cables anchored to Ford Island itself, and even then it was deemed too damaged to return to combat. The Arizona was too badly destroyed to save, but it was left in place partly because it was visible, central, and already becoming symbolic in the national grief over the attack. Utah was assessed and left. In 1942, workers removed the propeller shafts and a limited number of reusable materials, but the hull itself was judged not worth the enormous effort and cost of righting. It was obsolete before the attack. Righting a capsized ship is one of the most demanding operations in maritime salvage, even under ideal conditions, and the Utah offered no strategic return. That decision made complete sense in wartime triage. The problem is that the war ended in 1945. 80 years passed, and Utah is still there, in the same position, for reasons that have since evolved from pragmatism into something considerably more complicated. The wreck of the USS Utah is designated as a military war grave under United States law and Navy policy. That designation carries real legal weight. The remains of the 58 men entombed inside are protected. Any operation that would disturb the site, raising the hull, cutting into sections of the wreck, attempting to recover remains, requires federal authorization and a carefully managed plan for handling what would be found. The Navy has never formally proposed a full recovery operation. The reasons are not simply bureaucratic. War grave status exists to honor the dead, but it also functions as a permanent structural constraint on what can be done with the site. You cannot simply send divers down to extract remains from a capsized, corroded hull that has been underwater for more than 80 years without a serious plan, serious resources, and serious ethical clarity about what you are doing and why. The families of the men still inside hold varying views on whether recovery is even desirable. Some want the wreck left undisturbed as a permanent resting place. Others have asked for repatriation of remains. No consensus exists, and the Navy has not forced one. The law that protects those men also, in practice, guarantees that the hull continues to decay around them, while the question of what to do about it remains unresolved. Even setting the legal question aside entirely, the physical reality of any recovery operation is brutal. The wreck has been capsized and submerged in salt water for more than 80 years. Marine growth has colonized the exterior. Corrosion has worked continuously through the steel across that entire period. Any structural assessment of the hull today would find metal that has thinned, weakened, and in some sections likely become critically fragile. Righting a capsized warship is one of the most difficult operations in maritime salvage under the best conditions. It requires enormous lift capacity, precise rigging, and careful calculation of how a deteriorated structure will respond to stress. The risk with a wreck this old is that attempting to move it, or even to cut into it significantly, could cause catastrophic fragmentation. The Navy has faced a similar question with the Arizona, where structural assessments conducted over the decades concluded that large-scale intervention was essentially impractical. The cost was enormous, and the risk of causing further damage to the site and to the remains inside was judged too high. The Utah is older in terms of time submerged, has received far less systematic monitoring, and sits in an inverted position that compounds every engineering challenge. If anything, the case against physical intervention grows stronger with each passing year, not weaker. Every year of additional corrosion narrows the options further. The window for any realistic intervention, if it ever existed, has been closing slowly and without announcement for decades. Ford Island is not a public space. It is an active military installation within Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam, and access requires either military affiliation or participation in a supervised visit through limited programs. Utah's Memorial, a modest platform and plaque, sits on the island's restricted shore, reachable only by those with authorization to be there. Contrast that with the Arizona Memorial, which sits in the main harbor channel and is reached by a short boat ride available to the general public through the National Park Service. The Arizona's location made it visible, politically prominent, and architecturally memorializable in a way that shaped how the entire country grieved Pearl Harbor for generations. Utah's location made it marginal from the start, on the wrong side of the island, in restricted water, off the main path. Veterans advocates and family groups have pushed for improved public access and greater recognition, arguing that the men aboard the Utah deserve the same national acknowledgement as those on the Arizona. Those men died in the same attack, in the same harbor, on the same morning. Whether they are remembered with equal weight may depend less on how they died and more on where their ship happened to come to rest. Here is what makes Utah's situation different from Arizona's in a way that tends to keep it off the public agenda. The Arizona leaks. It has been slowly releasing fuel oil into Pearl Harbor for decades, a visible, ongoing, documented environmental condition that keeps the wreck in active conversation among researchers, conservationists, and policymakers. Researchers from the National Park Service and NOAA have monitored that oil seepage for years, measuring flow rates, debating what happens when the tanks finally corrode through entirely, and publishing technical assessments of the threat it poses to the harbor ecosystem. Arizona has a visible, present tense problem that demands attention. Utah's ongoing condition is the opposite of visible. It is simply disappearing. No dramatic leak, no measurable contamination plume, no environmental alarm pulling researchers back to it annually. Just steel slowly losing integrity, year by year, in water that asks no questions and makes no announcements. Once the hull is gone, not salvaged, not properly memorialized, just dissolved into the harbor floor, what remains is sediment. The 58 men inside have no recoverable location if the structure fully collapses around them. There is no crisis driving action. There is only a quiet clock and a rate of decay that accelerates with each passing decade, and a formal response that has not yet arrived. Pearl Harbor on a normal afternoon looks calm. Tourist boats move across the water toward the Arizona Memorial. The white structure reflects cleanly in the harbor. Less than 1 kilometer away, on the restricted northwest shore of Ford Island, the rusted edge of Utah's hull still breaks the surface. The tide moves past it the same way it has moved past it since December 1941. Utah was among the first American warships capsized at Pearl Harbor, lost in the opening minutes of the attack, before the Arizona had fully settled. That fact is not widely known. 58 men, 12 meters of water, 80+ years. No recovery plan on record. Arizona became the symbol because of where it sat, how it looked, and what the country needed it to mean. Utah became silent for the same reasons, reversed. Those 58 men have been in that hull longer than most of the people who know their names have been alive.